Perfect. So now, officially, dear guests, dear panelists, both online and on site here in the room, welcome to Not in My Backyard. And we apologize for slight delay. Sometimes technical issues have to be solved, but now we are very happy to have you here. And tonight we have a joint discussion then on acceptance on national energy autonomy and international cooperation, and it's organized by the Science and Innovation Network of the British Embassy in Berlin and Wissenschaft, Kontrovers. So a bit of context for that one. Wissenschaft Kontrovers is an event series organized by Wissenschaft and Dialog, and it's part of the Wissenschaftsjahr 2020-21, the German science year, which is bioeconomy overall topic this year. And the whole project is funded by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research. So what are we going to do here? So the aim is to speak about sustainable, future-oriented, and reliable energy supply. And some of you might know about the European Green Deal, so the ambitions of the European Union to become climate neutral as a whole for Europe by 2050. And maybe in order to protect the climate, but also in terms of energy autonomy, fossil fuels will have to be replaced by renewable energy sources such as wind, hydrogen, many others are discussed. The question is, however, how exactly to proceed? And can we strive for energy autonomy together in Europe, or is it a single country issue? How could that look like? And then we have facing growing demand of energy. And the question is which sources can satisfy that demand? And ultimately, and this is tonight's topic, which technologies will be accepted by all of us, the citizens? And while new infrastructures, yes, they might be required there, but not in my backyard, maybe. So my name is Christine August. I will be the moderator for this event. And before I introduce our experts to you, who are present here and as well online, I provide some guidance so that we can all benefit the next from today's interactive debate, which is happening both here on site and online. So we will have a House of Commons style debate, and that's actually modeled after the British House of Commons debates. And so we have two slides here. And we will have 4 experts here, one online, with very different perspectives on the topic of energy transition. And each of them will give a short input, and included in that input, there are maybe statements or questions. And then we want to know, what do you think about this question? What's your position on that? And how can you express your opinion? Well, how does it work? For you here in the room, you can literally take sides by switching your seat, and depending on your answer, you will see either it's to the left or to the right. That will be very clear with the slides in the background. And well, for all of the session when you do, but also when you see this, please wear your mask, which you're doing right now. This is perfect. Thank you for that. And for our online audience, how to integrate your feedback? Well, we work with Mentimeter, which is an online polling tool, and you just have to visit the website menti.com and enter a code, which is also provided in the slides later. And so this is completely anonymous, and you don't have to register, so that's very easy. And those for you who are following us online, there's a German translation available. It's somewhere in the description beneath the video you're watching. There's a link to the Zoom webinar, and there you can follow all of that in German. So, and everyone, both here and online, you're all invited to really discuss with us. So either you type your questions in the chat, or you raise your hand. We're looking forward to your contributions, to your feedback, opinions. And maybe it might be also interesting for those being present here to learn a little bit about why you actually chose your seat, what's the reason behind for this thing. Well, now finally, they have been sitting here for a while. You were able to you admire them already, let me introduce our panelists. So, because I'm with experts here with from very different fields of science, I will not stick 100% to the alphabet, but more to the order of the thoughts. So, I kindly welcome Adi Jansen, research associate with the Faculty of Natural Sciences at Imperial College London. And there you are busy with modeling power and electrical systems. Now, a warm hello and welcome to Sandra Esteves here online, who's joining us from Wales today. Very happy about that. And she's professor in bioprocess technology for resource recovery in terms of energy and materials. And this is all happening at the Sustainable Environment Center, Research Center in the University of South Wales. Then I may present Sandra Esteves to you. Present here, she's professor of precision analysis and socioeconomic assessment at RWTH Aachen University. And finally, Timo Mena, who leads the Berlin office of the Wuppertal Institute for Climate, Environment, and Energy, known as the think tank for sustainability, to make it short. And so please welcome all of them with a warm applause, and we appreciate that you're here with us and that you're here with us too. So. We will start with basics of the energy transition, both in terms of in Germany as well. How feasible is the energy transition project?
Thank you. Can I ask, do I have to screen share? Cool. Screen share.
Yeah. We should be sharing it. So we'll start to share it. There you go. Okay.
That's the updated slide. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Excellent. I'm Malte Jansen. I work as a researcher at Imperial College for the last 4 years. I do research in the energy system, mostly looking at policy environments in which we can accelerate or in some cases decelerate the transition that we're going through. And I'll show you some examples. We're supposed to be playing some videos, but essentially I'm talking about the reasons why we're doing this kind of research is because we look at climate change. You all too well remember the floodings earlier this year. The middle one is actually from China, but the left and the right one are from Europe, from recent events, and that's the whole driver behind that. The question is, why is that a problem? So, as we all know, the energy consumption is closely related to climate change, especially the use of fossil fuels. And if we look at the consumption of energy, 83% of those are still used by fossil fuels. Despite all the effort we have put in over the last decades, renewables only take a smaller share of the total primary energy consumption. It's a little bit of a different picture when you look at the final energy consumption. And even though you can see the dip here, the 2020 COVID reduction, you can very clearly see the reduction around the global financial crisis as well, around 2009. But by and large, the energy consumption is growing, and from 2000 onwards quite significantly on coal as well. And I think everyone who's been following COP this year knows coal is a bad source of energy and will have to go eventually, and the sooner the better. Looking at this further, not just energy, some type of energy is bad and some type of energy is good, but what it means for us as a consumer who want to heat our homes, who want to drive a car. This is the price of gas in the UK this year. Me as a UK gas consumer with my beloved boiler in the cupboard will have to pay twice as much for heating my house in the winter this year. And this is particularly problematic for people on lower incomes And that is one of those drivers why we want to strive to be more independent and cost decoupled. And the other thing, you've probably been watching the news as well, is long queues at the petrol stations in the UK. I haven't personally seen them because I'm taking the underground and trains to work and I don't own a car. But I've been rest assured by all my colleagues who have a car that there's been 2 weeks without virtually no petrol, and the problem just like vanished into thin air. Very interesting. Which leads me to my first question, and I will have the pleasure and a slight desperation to make you move around the room and ask you, do you feel that quick progress has been made with the energy transition? So the ones that say yes, please stay on here on the government side, and the ones that say no, please stay on the opposition side, which is to the left of the speaker, obviously.
Anybody will remain on the one side. But no question, even if it's just one person sitting on one side, that's totally welcome and totally fine. And because the audience online, they cannot see fully is that, yeah, one side always present to that. But online, you're affecting the same picture. So, yeah, it's 100% saying no. Here in the room, it's 97, I'd say.
I think it's a very good picture, and I'll show you in a minute why I think that this might be probably a bit more nuanced in reality than we see in this room, because looking at what type of speed progression we're looking at different sectors in different countries, you can get quite a different answer. What does progress mean? And I've pulled the numbers from the same report again over the last 5 decades of progress here in inverted commas. You can see how King oil, as it used to be up to the 70s, slowly losing ground. Coal, in terms of primary energy, is slowly moving out, but gas is going up. And only very recently have renewables overtaken nuclear production and still get to overtake hydro production. So very little in terms of progress on the primary energy basis. But if we, for example, look at the UK, and we have 100 years of energy transition in inverted commas again on here. So you can see that virtually for the time between 1920 and 1990, the UK energy system was virtually the same. A little bit of hydro on top, mostly backed by coal, and then the introduction of nuclear power. If we progress 10 years, in the UK, that's what we call the dash for gas. There was a liberalization obviously going on, and the government had a concerted effort replacing coal with gas, which slashed the consumption of coal by half within a decade. And then going a bit further on into the 2010s, you can see gas has now thoroughly overtaken all of it. And then just in the last 10 years, if you look how the energy system has changed in the UK, is quite phenomenal. Coal is virtually gone, but a couple of days in the year where it's very cold and no wind. This has been taken over by gas, but mostly wind, and particularly offshore wind, where the UK is, until the new numbers from ARENA come up, still the largest operator of offshore wind power plants. So this is a very interesting system, retiring old power station. I think Margaret Thatcher has done us a favor in terms of closing the coal mines, not necessarily as transitioning those areas in a socially responsible way. Raising carbon prices. So the underlying mechanism of bringing down the coal consumption there was having a carbon tax added to coal or to all generators of £18, which is not that much, which brought down the coal in the UK, and other measures such as energy efficiency. And that makes the UK, here on the global map, but also as a ranking, the fastest decarbonising power sector in the world. Followed closely by Denmark, and then people you wouldn't have expected necessarily as USA, China, and Germany's in place 10 on a per kilowatt hour basis. Obviously, I mean, China has been expanding its power sector, so the picture probably doesn't look like good as in terms of gigatons of emissions. I would now lead over to a second question that I would like to ask you. Are you willing to spend more for sustainable energy? And I would say the yes is the left side on me, so that's the opposition, and the right side is with the government in this case. Is that the other way around?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm looking at the. Can I ask everyone who says yes to vote with the side of the government, and everyone who believes they shouldn't be paying more?
So we do see that online it's 50-50 here in the room. People are willing to spend more for sustainable energy. There's quite a bit of movement in the room.
Yes.
Okay. We have to remark here, I translate so that everybody can understand that it's depending on the time frame. And that long term, you're saying it would. So be curious if you have a remark from the low side, but in the long term, it would end. Yes.
Long term, I expect prices to come down. Short term,
And would you be willing?
yes.
Yes.
It feels like a
Okay.
fun.
So this is a tricky question. Also depends on kind of what and we are taking all of that later into discussion, and I think we are ready for new input and challenge.
Yeah, I'll resolve that issue for you. You can see I've plotted the cost of wind and solar on a production basis only over the last years, and you can see especially solar has sort of been at the top of the graph, sort of very, very expensive, not to measure that. And at the same time, if we then draw the price of oil against that in US dollars per barrel, but in the same scale, then you can see that the price of oil has been fluctuating, yes, but also that wind and solar are very closely, very rapidly approaching what a barrel of oil costs. So I think we're coming into a nice position now where we don't even have to necessarily spend more in the short run to get long-term cost reduction gains. And I think this has fundamentally changed in the last 2-3 years, where renewables are now the cheapest source of electricity almost anywhere in the world. And then coming back to the UK story, obviously UK, you know, has a lot of offshore wind. I've actually taken that wind picture out south of Brighton on a very calm day because the turbines weren't actually rotating. But the UK has employed like other countries, employed a very specific way to procure capacity to build wind turbines at cost, because they put out a capacity. The next one will be in December this year, saying we want 6 gigawatts of offshore wind. Who can go the cheapest for that? And this has been driving down the costs for the last 5 years in the UK to the point of coming down from £120 per megawatt to under £40 per megawatt within half a decade. So that's a cost reduction of 2/3 of the costs. And when we compare that to conventional generation, you can see that it's already cheaper than new coal, including carbon price, and is comparative to new gas power plants at an insane amount of production hours as well. And the costs have been falling by 12% every year in the last half year. It's been this particular piece of research has been welcome news. People wanted to know good news in Corona times last year, so there's been lots of news coverage on that. But I would, in interest of time, move on to the next slide. Do you think that current technologies are sufficient to reach net zero? And to look properly, the no is to the left side of the speaker, so sides with the opposition, and the yes is to the right side of the speaker and sides with the government.
So now this time, yes, no movement here in the room. On online, it seems that there's a clear 80% no in the room. It's more like 50-50 years, maybe a little bit more saying no.
And I promise you I'm not going to answer that question for you. But I'll show you the challenge. Essentially, if you look at what has happened in the first quarter of this year in the UK, we had a massive wind drought. I think there's the beautiful German word of Dunkelflaute in there, which everyone in the UK, by the way, is using now. That's an established term. But you can see the production of wind and gas in the UK over the first 3 months, and gas seems to be mirroring wind almost perfectly in all instances. And there's been 10, 11 days of virtually no wind, and that caused a big problem. And for those of us who do energy systems research, we measure things in dynawics. And you ask, what is a dynawic? A dynawic is the largest UK pumped hydro storage in Wales. So you can see the lake up there in the middle of the picture. That's the upper basin, and so you see the lower basin in front of you. So in order to cover that shortfall of 10 gigawatts short of capacity in that time, we need about 5 dynawics. But when we look at the energy that's been contained in that wind low, we need about 250 dynawics in terms of capacity. So filling that gap is a huge challenge, especially for an island system. And with that, I will close. I'll take your questions probably later for the discussion. Is that right?
I think if there are questions right now or comments, we will have time to take one or two. Yes, there's one in the room here. And yeah, you audience online, please remember you're very welcome to put questions in the chat and together we'll see.
Yeah, and just one question to your last slide. Do you have any idea what should probably replace gas in that context?
Well, I think it's a combination of all of it, really. You could do some sort of flexibility, but those flexibility options you usually do maybe a day or two. If you have a heat pump at home with storage that could shift around, charge up the storage. Same goes with cars. I think this has been a once in a decade or once in 2 decades kind of wind lull that we've been observing there. And there is virtually no way around of having some sort of long-term storage. And I think we're talking hydrogen or SNG, like synthetic methane on that scale, because that has happened across the continent as well. So you can't just tap into the interconnectors and bring the power over from France and Germany. But you need to have some sort of backup option. And I think there's no sugarcoating. Thank you.
Yeah, there's one more question. I think here, please.
My question is for bureaucracy. How long do you need to bring up an offshore wind park in UK? Because I think Germany is also quite a huge problem. Do you have huge bureaucratic issues or the huge mess?
Well, I think there are 2 distinct processes that you need to separate. One is the Crown estate, so the Queen's real estate, if you would like to, has the right to the seabeds. So those seabeds are being auctioned off in a separate auction. So you gain the right to access the sea, is number 1. And then the second one is the UK, the government auctioning off the right to get subsidies on the parks that you're planning. So there is a healthy pipeline of 25 to 30 gigawatts of wind parks in planning for those certain sites that have seabed leases and probably some beyond. But it takes a lot of time. Like look at what Crown Estate has just auctioned off in round 4, has the right to be built on for the next decade, and some of them already see this as like they probably will need the better part of the decade for that. So it's not easier, it's just different, I would say.
Thank you. Yeah, there were some astonished faces here in the audience with that answer. And thanks for enlightening us. And I think after this overview, thank you very much for that one. We will now come to the specific example and also to the question, how acceptable is biotech with your energy systems? And we will hear about biomass and bioenergy. I can't see our speaker at the moment, but in a second we will have your sunrise there. Please, we're happy to have you. Looking forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Thanks for the invitation to present to you today. I'm Sandra Silves from the University of South Wales. I'm a professor in bioprocess technology, and I'll be presenting you some slides and some questions in the same format as my colleague as well. I'm just wondering if someone could help me to share my slides, please. Okay, thanks very much. So the topic is around bioconversion processes. This is done by microbes. I deal with bacteria and archaea mainly, and photosynthetic microbes as well, which we understand their capabilities for as catalysts for green growth and sustainable change. So I'll go through some slides now. Next slide, please. Okay. I'm sure everyone know this, but fossil fuels in reality is long-term biomass that has been stored and converted for many, many years. Think about bioenergy and biofuels. Through decades, we've relied quite a lot on the biomass that we had, and we go back to things like food wastes, animal slurries, industrial organic waste that are available, forest residues, marine residues, and even energy crops and algae that you can grow for the purpose. And through a number of conversion methodologies, whether it's thermal processes or biological processes, or even catalysts and chemical processes, you can actually achieve a number of fuels within that. So you've got fuels like hydrogen that can be produced from bioenergy, but also alkanes, our typical methane, propane, butane, etc., and alcohols as well, biodiesel and glycerol as other fuels as well. And at the same time, you have your carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide as you can extract those as well. The question really is, do we maintain the usage of this biomass, whether it's fresh grown biomass or recent wastes, or we go back and dig old fossil fuel bioenergy? And the question is, we have to go with a quick turnaround and not extract any more CO2 from the ground as we can, and then just convert that. And the following question is, do we maintain that biomass circulating for bioenergy or biofuels, or do we utilize it for other things like food, feed, chemical production, polymer production? So those are then the choices that I think governments and general public need to make the decision whether the energy should come from other renewables and biomass be converted to other materials or not. Next slide, please. So in terms of bioprocesses, I don't know if everyone is aware, but they can actually be quite versatile. So you can pick up on things like microbes utilizing methane, but you can also pick up on microbes utilizing CO2 and other carbon sources. For example, you see the second diagram there, the second map that appears there is in the south of the UK. And those red dot means there is restrictions on how much electricity can be injected into the network. So, you could end up deploying a number of renewables, but there is a challenge of connecting to the grid. And then, as everyone knows, the frequency of the renewables may not be the frequency of the need for the electricity. So there is definitely a need for energy storage. Whether we storage in terms of hydrogen, for example, or we convert that hydrogen potentially with CO2 to other fuels, and we convert things to methane, propane, butane, etc. So this is the energy side. What about if we actually look at the biomass from a perspective of not just the energy, but the polymers that we might need, the recovery of nutrients, the production of alternative protein? Could we use that carbon for those aspects? And that's really where I would like to take the conversation here is bioenergy related to just fuels, or can we actually take some of these resources and be linking with other sectors? Next slide, please. I've heard that you will have an offer for a nice drink after this session. I won't be able to be there, but after the drink, there will be a little test on this diagram for everybody. Is only joking. Anaerobic digestion. Germany actually has a number of AD plants, and UK has over 600 plants as well. As you can see there, we can start with a very complex feedstock, break down into some gases, some acids, etc., before we end up to our final product like methane, for example. And we can end up in hydrogen, we can end up in volatile fatty acids. And that's really the question is, where do we take these processes to? Is it the methane that could actually be converted to protein or to lipids, or to many other components and chemicals? Or do we stop at certain stages of hydrogen? Do we stop at volatile fatty acids, for example? Next slide, please. And as you can see there as well, there is a link with electrons. You know, microbes actually shift electrons between themselves and materials within surfaces. So there's a lot of complexity in these processes, and we can actually use those complexities to actually start to define circular economy and fluxes and flow diagrams that may link energy systems with others. The next slide actually talks about, you know, the same thing. Oh, sorry, the previous one. This idea that, you know, shall we start at methane as our final product and then go back through the cycle through a number of thermal and chemical processes back to acetic acid, or should we have stopped biologically at acetic acid and have that as our final product for industry? And those are the questions I think a lot of academics are trying to answer, and hopefully we can pass that information to government and to society to make decisions on. The next slide, please. So for example, here is food wastes. Everyone has a number of food waste per year, per day, and a number of volatile fatty acids can be produced. And depending on how we run the process, they can be producing more acetic acid or more propionic acid, depends on what the markets that we're looking at. The next slide, please. Or for example, people talk about sewage sludge. You know, nobody wants to know about sewage sludge as a resource, but we've got an abundance of sewage sludge around the world as a very common feedstock. And the question again is, do we convert to a methane for energy production, for heat, for electricity to use as transport fuel, or can we actually do different things within the process there, like electrodialysis in that case, and precipitation of the nutrients, and actually take it to a fermenter where the microbes, instead of producing the gas, actually are accumulating that organic molecules in the form of polymers and then extract. And you can see on the left-hand side a number of packaging, for example, that you can produce from that resource. So quite interesting decisions that current society needs to be making choices, I think. Next slide, please. Same as I forgot to mention with the polymer, there's actually the opportunity to also produce a single cell protein, and we can use that for feed, etc., etc. People will ask, well, you know, we're creating a lot of problems around polymers. These particular polymers, for example, that bacteria can produce, they can also reconsume that polymer as well. So if it enters the environment, aerobic or anaerobic microbes can actually reutilize these molecules as well, whether it's to produce methane or to produce acids or whatever. So it's very interesting to start looking at how can we map resources and energy and all these fluxes and what societies want in one region, in a cluster, in an industrial cluster. You may feel that the energy output is more important, in others the feed is more important, or the food, or whatever it is. Let's move on to the next slide, please. For example, this is a project that we've delivered, funded by the Department of Energy in the UK, and is looking at, well, if we produce, if there's wind and solar and marine, and we can't use those resources at the time of production, how can we store? In this case, for example, we use electrolysis for production of hydrogen, and then we pick up on CO2 from industry and a number of other processes. And we can actually then biologically convert that into acids, propane, butane, methane, number of other molecules that might be useful for either industrial processes or energy processes. Just the next slide, please. And just some pictures that you might feel that, you know, gives you a context of where we are in terms of this process, how far from market they are. So they look like that on the right-hand side. So a few liters of reactors where we can actually produce these outputs. Instead of just looking at them from an energy point of view, we can actually produce these products for something else. Next slide, please. Another project, for example, that we engage with is anaerobic digestion typically gives you a pretty flat output in terms of energy or methane, for example. And if we want to utilize that for cleanup first and then engaging into the gas grid, you have the daily fluctuations on the needs. The demand is different in the mornings as midday and evenings, for example. But also there's a huge difference between the demand during the day, during the winter and during the summer. A summer night need for gas is significantly lower than a winter's day, for example. And we're trying to then, for example, utilize these acids instead and store those as liquid form in order to produce the gas, for example, when is required, then rather than as the resource comes along. So decoupling that the resource from the demand of that energy as well. Just give you a flavor of what currently is possible in the labs and at the pilot scale, and the potentially can actually make it to marketplace. Just the next slide as well, please. And can stop at methane, but we can actually stop at propane, butane, and then even the higher chain molecules as well. So I think that's a different area of work that is not just that, typical, production burn to produce heat or bioferment to produce methane, but gives you a flavor that actually biological processes could have a much wider role in terms of energy systems, but then linking energy systems with many other sectors. Next slide, please. And this is really where possibly I'm trying to get to with my presentation is, we learn a lot from nature. For example, in wastewater treatment plants, What we're trying to do there is what nature would do, but over a longer period of time and possibly requiring more space. So we have sedimentations, we have aerobic microbes working, we have anaerobic microbes working in order to consume that carbon that comes through and deal with the nutrients as well. But if you look at nature, nature is not divisive. It relies pretty much on physical, chemical, and biological versions, rather than having specification, these, if you want to recycle a bottle, you're going to produce a bottle from it. And nature doesn't do that. It returns the nutrients, it returns the carbon, and then at various stages, different locations, different microbial communities, they will convert those things into different things. And that's really, that solid, liquid, gaseous state, it varies through nature. And the same thing as on the right-hand side in my loop there is, where does wastes really, where do we want to direct them? Is it to a gas and energy? Is it to a feed, food? How do we link all of that? The linkage with electrons. Nature does these very, very well. And I think we just need to learn more about these no barriers from a geography and socioeconomic aspects around that. But I think it's a very interesting topic within the biomass and organic molecules and their role within sustainability, I think. Just the next slide, please, which I think takes us to...
I think we almost used your time up. So we're still curious, maybe we could jump to the first question. I felt the curiosity in the room. So, can you read it out to us? Or shall I?
Sorry, I didn't quite get that. Do you want me to read the question?
Yeah, that would be lovely.
Great, thank you. So should energy systems be planned and delivered in isolation from other systems, such as food, feed, in industrial commodity provision?
So online, the first feedback says a clear no. Here it should be all. I'd say as well. So it's 99%, and some people even find C. So in the audience here on site, here, so here I'd say almost 100%, and online is 80% saying no, 10%.
Okay, that's very good. Yes. So we should plan it more integrative. Yeah, that's great. And do you think bioenergy will play an important role in the next 50 years? Yes or no?
I think Sandra is hoping for yes. So online, 75% saying yes. In the room, that maybe a little bit more ordinary the results online. So I think you're happy to hear that.
Okay, that's a fair chance. Yes, 100%. Very good. Okay, I think there's one more question.
Perfect.
Okay, that's a bit of a scenario. Okay, so there is a planning permission is being sought for an industrial bioprocess which converts carbon to renewable food, feed, chemicals, and energy very effectively. Okay, so no doubting about that, with no or very little environmental impact, but is near your house. Okay, however, it will need to displace 1/10 of a local forest, but you will store over 1,000 times more carbon than the forest over the next 40 to 50 years, and will generate 500 high-skilled jobs. Okay, so the question is, would you likely be supportive of the installation or not?
You're challenging us.
Very good.
Marianne.
So you have
Okay.
to clear your house, local forests will be destroyed. There's, however, more carbon urge in the few from 50 to 40 years. Jobs, all in one, I think. I can't get more comfortable. Well, let's wait for your So online, 60% say yes, we would be supportive. And here in the room, it's even more. So here it's nearly 100%. Sarah, personally, would you be supportive?
That's very good. I'm glad I only have 3 questions because I think we're going downhill now.
Sarah, would you support the installation personally if it was close to your house?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Would you vote yes or no on that one?
Myself? Yes, I would vote yes.
So we will have one more seat for you here in the room. Thank you for that challenge.
Thank you all. I'm happy to take any questions.
Would there be there's one question, I think. Yes, we will take that. In the back. Maybe a quick one. Quick and easy to answer. I think.
Respect to the last question. Why this the same installation could not be installed somewhere else? Why does it need to be placed at trees or this does not make any sense? Because if you get the technology for this the same installation somewhere else, so where you do not affect the trees.
Sorry, could someone with a mic perhaps do a summary of the question? I couldn't really get what you've asked.
Let's just assume that are very good reasons. And then also, I don't know your house is only option in all of Europe. Sarah, yeah, it was difficult to hear from you, I guess.
I'm really sorry, but I think my voice to you is okay, but the return is not so good. So I really can't hear what you're saying.
So, Sarah, thank you very much. We managed to answer it here in the room, kind of.
Okay, thank you.
And we thank you very much for your enthusiasm and for all the challenges that you provided.
Thank you.
We will now come to our next sample. Sarah in-house, please. And we are diving a bit more into the question of how green is green energy. And we will hear about bioenergy and Zeit. So if you where does the biomass actually come from? So looking forward and towards yours in a second.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. It's exciting to be in a room with actual people to talk to and discuss with. And I really like the format, so I made the slides a little more controversial so that we can actually discuss important things. I also really like the last questions that we had, because they're a great sort of introduction to what I'm going to talk about now. My name is Frankhaus. I'm a professor of decision analysis and socioeconomic assessment at RWTH Aachen University. But I also lead a group doing research on ethics, sustainability, and the resource nexus at the Forschungszentrum in Jülich. And so, yeah, my question is how green is green? And I want to look at the German energy transition and some of its side effects. These aren't the most recent numbers, but I think they still very well resemble sort of the trends that we're facing. I'm going to go rather quickly through these so that we have more time for the discussion. But what we see here is essentially that we know the economic growth, global GDP, is very closely related to fossil resource use and the CO2 concentration. So the topics typically related to the energy system and climate change on the left side. But we also have a number of other trends, such as population development, which we know will increase, the economic development also in other world regions will lead to an increase in resource extraction, resource demands, and also different rare earth materials that will be demanded increasingly. So these are also just some numbers to show how directly correlated economic growth here in GDP and the CO2 emissions are. On the right side, you can actually see that if we want to reach our climate target, if we want to go net zero, at some point we're going to have to reach the point where we actually decouple economic growth from the CO2 emissions. So skipping to the German energy transition, the Energiewende, I think we're on a really ambitious path. The German Energiewende is often considered as sort of a role model for European energy policy, but also globally, we know that a lot of countries are looking at Germany and whether we will succeed in the energy transition. And yeah, a lot of perspectives are very positive, but there's also a lot of skepticism of whether it will be successful, whether it can be successful, both sort of from global perspectives, but also within the German public. And the reason is that I guess many of the solution strategies that we're pursuing aren't sort of clearly positive, aren't the solution to everything, but essentially everything that we decide, that we choose, comes with some form of negative side effects that I want to shed a little light on in my talk today. So I want to actually jump right into the first question. And this is the topic of electric mobility, electric vehicles. And there are also different discussions on sort of the ecological sustainability of electric vehicles. And so my first question is actually, do you believe electric vehicles are a sustainable option for the transport sector? Yes or no? If you say yes, please come to the left side, so the right side here, I guess, this side. And if you say no, move to the left side of the room. The overall system. So for the overall system.
So yeah, after clarifying some questions, here it reflects. Well, here it's 2/3 saying yes, electric vehicles are sustainable, but online it's a different picture. 75% saying that not sustainable.
Right. Would someone from each side just give one argument of why you chose the side that you chose? Someone on this side?
Does anybody there? Maybe from the majority, that's easier.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess it's a question of relatively sustainable. So I think it's more sustainable in the short, medium term than petrol and diesel vehicles. Obviously, there are issues with the the elements that are extended now. But perhaps hopefully the time will find a circular funding solution. But you're right, it's not completely 100%.
Yeah, thank you. Someone from the other side.
Thank you. I think the question is, I'm sure they can be sustainable, but I'm not sure they are right now. And I think it's really a question about what kind of energy is powering the vehicles. So where's the energy coming from?
All right, yeah, thank you very much for all the comments that you made, because that's exactly the point. So it's all relative, right? If we're talking about the long term, the short term, the energy system, the transport sector, because obviously the sort of the mix of electricity that's used to fuel the vehicle plays a tremendous role. We also have a lot of life cycle assessments that say, if we look at the entire production process, the limited recyclability of the batteries, then it's not so sustainable. So there are all these what ifs and sort of no clear yes, no clear no. And also we have media articles that say, if we're looking for lithium critical resources that need to be mined in some place of the world, and it may be fine now, but if demand increases, that will actually create a huge problem. Depending on the country where the resources are coming from, we may have social challenges that maybe children are involved in the mining. And so this directly brings me to my next question. In order to mitigate sort of the global challenge of climate change, do you believe it's necessary and acceptable to cause more locally refined strains in other world regions, for example, through land use in other regions or mining of the resources in other regions? So if you say, yes, this is necessary and thus it is acceptable, please come to the left side. And if you say, no, this is not acceptable, move to the other side of the room.
Also challenging and tricky one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here in the room, the tendency is saying no, but it's not in a picture. And you joining us online and accepting that it's 50-50. Here it's a bit more people.
Yeah, I'm glad that it's this way. My fear was that everyone was going to go to one side, then the next answer or question wouldn't have said, because now I just want to mix, sort of change the scenario a little bit and assume that there were other options in Germany that are either more expensive or that are currently not accepted by the public, such as, for example, nuclear energy or the use of carbon capture and storage or carbon capture and use. In this scenario, would it still be okay? So again, yes, stay on this side, no, move to the other side.
Yeah, to describe what's happening here in the room, more people have left the yes side, and now it's almost 100% saying, 95% saying no, and but the online audience votes a bit differently, only 2/3 saying no, the other one yes.
Yep. So what we're seeing here is it's a wicked problem. There's no one single best solution. And so what we're doing in our research is actually we're looking at sort of the what ifs and the side effects of different scenarios, just to understand a little more what's happening. So what we did, for example, we used a complex model of to model the future, Germany's future energy system. It's a model that essentially has all of the energy technologies in it, the conversion, the final consumption, and the demands. And I don't want to go into the details of the model. But what we used the model for is we actually looked at all of the German energy transformation targets, the national ones, but also the European ones. On the left side, you see the targets until 2050. On the right side, we made sort of a continuation into the future of how these would have to develop in order to meet all of these targets of the energy transformation. And then we looked at what this means for Germany's future energy system. And one of the aspects that I want to shed some light on is the fact that we need biomass. We have the link to the previous talk again. So in all of the scenarios, biomass and bioenergy will play a tremendous role in the energy model the way we have it. We calculated different scenarios on whether we assume that agricultural land will remain constant or maybe decrease, if we assume that yields may increase, decrease, depending on the type of agriculture. But what you see on the right-hand side is that essentially for all of the scenarios that we calculated, the amount of biomass that we need to import will significantly increase because there simply isn't enough biomass available in Germany. And this is an effect that will only increase by the new leitmotif of the bioeconomy. So with the Coal Commission and the structural change, we in Germany have the two main policies driving this. So on the one hand, we decided to phase out coal power, but on the one hand, we have, especially for the Rheinische Revier, the Rhenish mining region, this new concept of a sustainable bioeconomy. The region wants to become a European model region for a sustainable bioeconomy. And so this will play an increasing role. So in the previous talk, we've already learned quite a bit about the use and the different uses of biomass. So the idea is to utilize biological resources in order to create new products, bio-based products, use new processes and services. And just as an overview, so we have in the past have had sort of the topic of food versus fuel. So we know we shouldn't use food crops for these kinds of production processes, but we have all kinds of different feedstocks on the right side, and that's the whole idea of the bioeconomy, different kinds of feedstocks, especially residues, so different kinds of bio-waste that we can use through different chemical processes to create bioenergy or biofuels, but the options are also bioplastics, textiles, and all chemicals, pharmaceuticals. So biomass in all of these processes can play a tremendous role. And this brings me to the next question. So we have the bioeconomy as this new economic leitmotif in Germany, but it will create additional competition for biomass. But it also has a significant potential, especially in high energy industries, to replace the fossil resources. We also know that Germany has a target to increase the share of ecological agriculture to 20 to 25% by 2030. And so my question is, do you think that Germany should increase the share of ecological agriculture, despite the fact that we can assume that there will be less available biomass because the yields are lower? Or should Germany reduce this target in order to have more biomass available for biological products? Again, if you say increase the share of ecological agriculture, come to this side. If you say no, we should increase biomass availability, move to the other side.
There's a bit of hesitation. Would interpret. And online it says 50-50. There was quick decision making. Here there is some movement that the outcome is 50-50 too.
Yeah. So that is a difficult one, but I think that also that these types of questions that I'm asking here is pretty much at the core of a lot of the sustainability transformation, the energy transition, because there simply aren't good solutions. We can't say, or if we just do this, we can solve the problem, but every sort of decision that we take has this negative side effect on some other part, and that makes it difficult for both sort of the social acceptance, for political decision making, and yeah, so I think these are important aspects to consider. This brings me to my conclusions. So we know that economic development must be decoupled from CO2 emissions if we want to reach our targets. I do believe, and there's general consensus, that green energy will play a key or be a key cornerstone of the energy transformation. Experts also have a very high agreement that we need sort of an adequate price for CO2 across sectors and across regions and countries. However, we must prevent the creation of new environmental or social problems when focusing too narrowly on sort of minimizing CO2 emissions. I think that's an important part. And sort of as a lead to the next talk, the energy transition, I believe, can only be successful if it's economically feasible, but if it's also socially acceptable. Yeah, and with this, I would like to conclude. And I look forward to questions and discussions.
Is there an immediate question that we can answer and go online? You can definitely write your answer in the chat. Yes, we've got one. Are you challenging the question?
Uh-oh.
No, I'm challenging another statement that you made.
Okay.
That you use the average mix, energy mix for any country to see whether electric cars are meaningful or not. If we increase the number of electric cars, this additional electric energy does not come from renewable energies, because the power plants are dispatched in a certain order. First come the renewable energies, then comes coal, nuclear, and then comes natural gas.
Yeah.
So the additional energy that we need for the electric cars comes exclusively, particularly if we charge during the day, from fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So this is nonsense what we are doing now.
I agree.
The electric cars would make sense if we would have 100% or maybe 90% of the electricity from renewable energies, then yes.
Yeah, I fully agree, and that's exactly the point. There are all these what ifs that come with these types of questions.
It very well illustrates the constraints and the side effects. I don't see other questions or remarks at this point, so thanks again. And well, we had already lots of food for thought, and you already announced that there will be another layer of complexity being added by Klima now. We will speak a bit more about the energy transition and effects on economy, social justice, and so on. Please.
Yeah, I go into another level, and maybe an abstract level, less, much more away from the technical issues of the energy system and the things colleagues have been presented, but really to the question of how can we do a social transition, and how, because the starting is, it's not in my backyard, and we've raised some not in my backyard questions, and there were questions of, if it costs more, how much are we willing to pay? And I just want to push it a little further. To start, I have a question which may be of, oh no, this is not my first question. No. Yes, this is my first question. We're doing all of this because of climate change, right? This is why we're doing the transition. If you were asked, would you see, is climate change an environmental issue, or is it actually a question of social economic justice? If you want, you can put in predominantly, but I would like to push you a little bit. So I've got to look at this. If you think it's climate policy and climate change is an environmental issue, please move to that side of the room. And if you think it's a more an issue of social and economic justice, move to that side of the room. And if none of you is moving at all, I'm not taking this as a, yeah, there is no middle ground. Sorry, you have to decide.
So there is kind of to the online audience, there is questions in the room, middle, we don't want to move this, I think we have to move. The panel gets excited about joining the yes side, or like the yes citizens environmental issue side. Online, we have got a 50 picture here in the room. People say climate policy is an issue of social and economic justice.
Good. Yeah, I would be definitely on that side. Absolutely, fully on that side. And I don't know, I'm preaching to the choir here, so I could just stop talking. But Right. At least the online audience, there's some disagreement with the online audience. No, because I honestly, when I listen to news, I'm so annoyed about this jobs versus environment, economy versus environment. And to me, climate, I mean, as much as I love polar bears, and yes, there should be polar bears when my son is old, right? And there should be birds and butterflies and whatnot. But the point is, Stern report says that the costs of climate change, of unabated climate change, are bigger than the costs of mitigation, right? So this is a question of costs. If there is damage, really economic damage of climate change, right? And then I think this is something all of us should have quicker in mind to be more responsive in debates, right? And to me, it is a question of economy. And I don't know, since we seemingly agree, but I think examples like, if I look at a hurricane in the Philippines, and if I assume something like hurricane in the Philippines will increase in the future, then what will the people in the Philippines spend their money on, right? Most likely not buying a fancy German car, right? So this is really clear-cut economy and distributing wealth across nations, but it's also a question of distributing wealth across generations. And I find it very funny, a politician in Germany said, well, if Friday for Futures, if they grow up and if they have to pay taxes, then they know that why we're doing the good thing and we're cautious with climate mitigation, right? Because they're out in the streets protesting because it's not their money. Well, if you assume that there's estimates of costs of CO2, the German Environmental Agency has estimated or estimates the number of 180 euros per ton damage, right? Each ton of CO2 costs 180 euros damage, economic damage, including reduced health lifetime, if you want to quantify that. And if you now think of our CO2 tax is 25 euros currently for like non-electricity sectors, my question is who pays the other 155 euros, right? And my son would say he's paying, right? Timon, pay the 25, but he pays eventually the 155. So it is for me, it's a justice question. Sorry to be so blunt to you. So, okay, I have another question. Where is it? No, here we go. Okay, currently we saw, and thank you very much for putting this up, we see this massive spike in energy prices, right? Because of various reasons, maybe short-term, longer-term, but we see a massive spike. And Malte said he's facing twice the heating bill after this winter compared to last winter, right? So, but we also have in Germany, for example, next January, we have an increase in the CO2 tax, CO2 carbon tax. So would you find it okay if we say, hey, energy prices are going up anyhow, should we postpone that increase in CO2 tax? Or should we stick to it? Tough luck, poor people, you gotta pay. Oh, and
This side, and then the other side, they think CO2 prices. That's not even possible. Yeah, also some hesitation. Some people were quick to switch sides. There's still some movement here in the room. Same online. I think we've got our final result here in the room. I'd say 75% say, yeah, increasing CO2 prices has started even faster online. It's 67%. You have an answer too.
Sure. I have an answer for everything. I wouldn't ask those questions. But anyone who says, yes, we should increase it, what's your line of argument? Especially not talking to me, but if you have to face this, hey, it's hard for poor people. I mean, we should not take that lightly. If poor people have problems paying their energy bill, why do we top this up with carbon prices?
Just a second, what the microphone, you can also.
Okay, so there is of course the question of who is paying the CO2 prices. It's like the poor people have to pay for themselves, and we have a huge problem there. But if you say, for example, that the companies who are producing the energy have to pay more, like to reduce the Scope 3 emissions and pay for that, then we have not that clear picture. I know where you are getting to, and when we are assuming that everyone has to pay for the CO2 prices themselves, then I will also switch seats.
Okay. My capitalist view is the company is going to pass it on to the consumer eventually, right? It's not the CEO paying for it, but I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
It's important with lifestyle cost intensive, but with emitting the CO2, I think with people are pretty much more emitting more CO2. I think the most important thing about this question is to find other ways and even faster, even smarter, because this lifestyle can become more expensive. This, I think, the thing. Of course, I know the question going to Mallorca is really important and doing this, but I think they have to find other mechanisms to get their gas kind of even faster. One idea.
Thank you. And I think this point of the richer people are actually emitting more CO2, right? And oh, go ahead.
I stay there because I think if we want to increase the CO2 prices, just increase not enough as Monster. some of them with you correct the text and maybe some also very targeted taxes on some product of consumption like lights, for example, some not necessary consumption.
Yeah. Thank you for all those thoughts. And I mean, I don't know if you've been following news this week. No, this week was last week. Last week, where actually there has been a big debate and raised by rather left party, the Linke in Germany. But if I take this point, it's actually a fact. The more people, the richer people are, the more CO2 they emit, right? And if you think of simple example, I don't know, a family of 4 living in a 70 square meter apartment, and a wealthy couple living in a 140 square meter apartment. I mean, if you take that as a thing, then obviously the wealthy couple has a higher energy bills and uses more energy. I mean, at least if they live in the same house, and right, it's complicated. But statistically, the richer you are, the more CO2 you emit, right? So if we postpone CO2 prices, actually it's the richer people who benefit for that in absolute terms. So, but on the other hand, I think we should think of fair ways of redistributing that. And I find it another issue where I'm telling you all the things which I got annoyed over the last year. It's so great that I can do this. But another thing that I found really screwed is the discussion about mobility. Mobility is the big issue. And of course, in a city like Berlin, we can have public transport, but in the countryside, how do we do it? And there is this image of, well, imagine the plumber who has his car and has to travel to all his customers in his car. What can you do? And it's so much more money for him. And then there is this incentive, which people have brought up, which we have in Germany, and people thought we could increase it, which is called Pendlerpauschale. I don't know what the English term is, or Great Britain has this, but it's basically a tax reduction for the further you work from your home, the bigger your tax reduction is. And so this was discussed in Germany as, okay, this balances off people in the countryside. Well, I'm like, yes, but it's a tax reduction, right? It means the more taxes I pay, the bigger my reduction. Why do I pay much taxes if I earn more? So yes, the plumber gets it, but his apprentice, no, sorry, doesn't get much out of that, right? The neighbor who is on retirement doesn't get anything out of that. The ex-plumber who just lost his job doesn't get anything out of that. But let's say the doctor who lives in a nice villa just outside of Berlin and uses his SOV to travel to his clinic inside of Berlin, he can pay his SOV from this. So why do we consider this as something which is balancing off climate mitigation injustices? And there are, I mean, I would say we really should take very great care of that we don't overburden. I mean, I don't know who we are and what our backgrounds are, but if I look at my economic background, I can pay the CO2 tax, no worries, right? It doesn't hurt me. Even, I mean, it's nasty that energy prices are up this year, but I can afford it, right? But other people can't, so we need to balance it out. And I find it very interesting that there has been a proposal of, okay, this could be paid off like per capita, 100 euros climate fund for people. Am I talking too long? You're looking at me? Yeah, okay, good, I speed up. And I find it interesting saying, hey, we just take that CO2 level and spread it equally across. And then if I get 100 euro, that's not a lot. But if someone who's really poor gets 100 euros, that's a lot. And I think we need to think way more about mechanisms that distribute the wealth. And as I said, to me, climate mitigation is not an environmental issue, but a justice issue. I have a third question. Should I go for it or no?
Yes, please.
No, where is it? Where am I? Oh, so Verbote. Hard to translate. I don't know if it's really as crisp as bans or prohibition in English, but in Germany, if you say Verbote, it's like, no, we don't want that. So do you think to support an effective and timely climate mitigation, bans of certain technologies are a suitable tool, or we should actually avoid bans and prohibitions? This is so boring. I'm so sorry. I'm not gonna speak in this room again. This is ultimately boring. Okay, good.
So this doesn't satisfy our speaker because everybody moved to the bans of certain technologies are a suitable tool side. And really, this time nobody said the other side. Online again, more interesting. We've got a 2/3 majority there.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah, I'm gonna look for a different audience next time, so there's more clash of it. I didn't want to insult you. No, but it's obviously we're a crowd of people who are supportive of bans. But if you look at public debate, especially in Germany, bans are and Verbote are the big bad thing. Where I would say there are actually certain bans which I like, right? Theft. I would not want I don't know, voluntary agreement of the mafia for lower theft rate, or murder, right? I would not want a monetary incentive scheme for decreasing murder, which we actually had, right? If you look at a few hundred years ago, you paid a blood fine, a blood toll, if you killed someone, and rich people could afford to occasionally kill someone, poorer people could not. And this is the funny thing about Verbote, it hits every one of us the same. If it's forbidden, no one can do it, whether you're rich or poor. So actually, Verbote, bans, prohibition, are in a way quite fair and just, right? And I don't want to stretch it. Of course, I'm happy if nobody tells me what not to do. I don't like myself if someone else tells me what not to do, but I think in general, it's something we should consider. And there are things which we also in the economic world, which we banned, right? Slavery, children working, we just banned that for good reason. And I think it's obviously not the only thing. We need a good policy mix, but it is something we should consider. Done.
Thank you very much. And thanks for taking back your time to your challenge our speaker, the other way around. And well, we started a bit later, so we take some 5 minutes, I guess, but we also shall ensure that we're not too long. From the audience, is there a remark, maybe how did you feel about questions? Was there something that was sticking out from your perspective? Anybody wants to comment? A lot of these questions are not. Just a second, please. I think the other stuff I have now.
I think these questions aren't yes no questions. They are intimately linked. They are absolutely dependent on it's impossible to say it's result of social inequality, what's going on here, what are the aims to change. Whatever we do, the fallout is something. And I think when we distribute guilt, it's also not a question of yes, should we pay this, no, shouldn't we pay something we're going to have to pay it. I don't think we're going to have a choice sooner or later. It's a question of distribution. And how do we arrange that in a fair way so that people who really are struggling to pay their bills don't have an extra 50 euros, 100 euros on their bill. Students, people who are with homeless people. I mean, there's just no way you can put more pressure on these groups of people. It has to be distributed in a fair way.
Any other remark at this point? Yeah.
I would like to make a point with respect to the cost of energy. I think there is consensus among politicians for sure, and among this panel that the cost of energy should be kept as low as possible. But then we need to consider that the less expensive something is, the more it is used. So we cannot achieve decarbonization if we are going to use energy the same way as we do it right now. So in my opinion, we should increase the energy prices significantly more than they are today, and then use this additional money, the state would do that, use this additional money to support the socially disadvantaged families, people, and so on. And this is a very... Yeah.
Thank you. There was a thought I wanted to quickly
Yeah.
react to.
Right.
Yeah.
Justin, okay. Yeah, I saw your tweet and you had a fine distinction in your wording, the cost of energy, the price, right? And that is two different things. The cost of energy is like I pay 100 euros at the end of the month. The price of energy is per unit, and I think per unit, like per liter, right? Euros per liter. That should definitely go up. I don't know, this could be my fourth question that I'm really annoyed with politicians who say, oh, CO2 prices must go up, what the price for gas and electricity should stay the same. What is that? That is absolute nonsense, right? If you believe that it's an incentive that prices go up and people use less, then we need to do it. But as you said, we need to rebalance it socially. And if we have great energy efficiency, the overall cost could actually be going up less than the price.
Okay, let's see. Is there any other remarks from the audience, maybe on this side?
Maybe there is a question we didn't talk about is the fact that the possibility to decrease the production or maybe degrowth as a solution to climate change, which would look like the most sure way to achieve the fight against climate change.
Yeah, so we've got another aspect. Yeah, degrowth.
That is what's here.
Instead of wondering how to satisfy growing demand. Well, I think we're running out of time. There might be so many other points to discuss, and if you manage, do you have, is there a learning, like a 3-word learning that you take home with you from the feedback from the audience, but also from maybe the thoughts of colleagues? Just a half a sentence. Yeah, half a sentence.
I like those questions best because they show the complexity of there is no right choice. I like that. And even if I provoke you and by accident you chose the right side, then I think it's obviously more complex. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the compliment. I really like the discussion format. I learned quite a bit about how, I guess, everyone sort of sees the complexity in this. And I guess one point that I'd like to make is that we're often talking about sort of the geophysical potential of renewable energies, and then we talk about the techno-economic potential. But I think we need to focus more on sort of the social, cultural potential. Because if we talk that we need higher prices for electricity, I fully agree. I fully agree with the statement. But we need to be careful that we don't have sort of protest votes next time around because politics are increasing prices and the general public doesn't accept that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll probably go into the other direction. I mean, for our scientists, we talk about costs, this how we do things, it keeps us busy until at least until I retire, so we 50. And I think the crucial aspect is understanding each other what we want, because we do one thing and we probably disagree. But by talking to each other, we understand what is necessary to take the next step in society with consensus to what we want to for our planet.
Thank you. Well, I see that there might be further remarks, but I'd say at this point we're taking it to the discussion afterwards, because well, hopefully it's the idea to continue all these topics that we were touching on today. And I think you're probably all very aware that this is a complex topic, but now maybe some of us realize, oh, there's even more complexity than I was considering. So let's have a valuable exchange of views, and for those present here, we can have a talk later on, and for those joining us online, and also that for everybody else, it's really worth taking those questions with you and check with other people that you know, colleagues, family, friends, neighbors, whoever, and check a little bit what's their point of view, to learn a little bit and get a better understanding of different opinions being around. And so on behalf of the organizers, I'd say thank you very much for having joined us, for your expertise, for your remarks, for not being shy to move around 10 times, 12 times, and more. Have a very good evening. Thank you very much for having joined us. To those of you who can't join the reception, I was asked to remind you to keep distance wherever possible, to wear your mask when you're moving, and yeah, thanks for following that one. Thank you very much.
Sandra, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us, and sorry for the technical difficulties. There's been a lot today.
Thank you. The sound on the way to me was quite